3 hours after birth, still bleeding. She was auctioned off, but one rancher saved her. The rope creaked above the auction pen as if the gallows had shifted closer to earth. Lantern light flickered in the dusk wind, smearing amber across faces that wanted a spectacle. Boots crunched in a circle of dust and spit. The girl in the pen could barely stand. Barefoot, 19 at most. Hair matted to her temples with sweat. The hem of her torn skirt dark with fresh blood. She gripped the wooden rail with both hands to keep from collapsing, her breath hitching, her eyes glassy. Somewhere behind her, wrapped in a scrap of blanket, a newborn whimpered, thin bird-bone sound in the iron bell night. "Lot 12, called the auctioneer, a thick man with a wolfish grin and a collar too tight for his neck. Woman healthy enough. With infant, he tilted his head toward the child the way a butcher nods at a side of pork. Start at $10. Don't be shy, Caleb Voss never brings damaged goods. She was called Marisol Reyes, small. Dark hair slicked with grief, the pale oval of her face interrupted by a bruise on her cheekbone, the color of a storm bruise. Every time a bid went up, she flinched, not at the shout but at the chuckle afterward. Men leaned in, palms on fence slats, hands like shovels and eyes like coins. She pressed the baby closer to her chest, the blanket growing darker as she shifted. She'd given birth on the trail 3 hours ago. Then the men who dragged her here pulled the child from her arms, long enough to smear the blood from her calves, like they were tidying a horse. Now they wanted to sell the mother and the child together. A match set, one of them joked. A cold question sliced the night, the kind that makes a soul hang on a breath. What kind of town stands still while a bleeding girl is auctioned with her baby? The wind seemed to hold its answer. The rope creaked again. Voss lifted the gavel and smiled like a man testing a blade. $10, someone called. 15, 20. Marisol blinked slow like a lantern going out. She swayed. The baby's cry wobbled thin and then stopped, the frightening quiet of a little chest forgetting air. A tremor moved through the crowd, part hunger, part shame, part the need to pretend neither existed. Voss's grin widened. Going once. Beyond the pen, a lone rider dismounted without hurry, dust scudding off his coat like old ash. He was older, late 40s, hat pulled low, duster stained by years of weather. A scar hooked his right cheek, pale as thread. He moved with the deliberate gravity of a man who had carried both cattle and coffins. No one knew him yet, but the horse turned its ear to him like it had learned to trust only one voice. Voss raised the gavel to finish the life on offer, and then the stranger spoke. 50. The pen went silent except for the rope's whisper and the soft, fragile rattle of a newborn trying to remember how to breathe. What kind of man pays to stop a cruelty instead of profit from it? The answer was walking toward the gate. Caleb Voss loved a crowd the way vultures love heat. He wore a broadcloth vest with brass buttons and a bolo tie pressed too hard into the flesh of his throat, as if he enjoyed the choke. His hair was slicked back with bear grease. His smile was a pickaxe that found seams in weak rock. He'd been deputized by the kind of men who never stood where bullets flew and called it law. At night he drank rye and practiced his patter in a mirror. By day he sold whatever he could loop a rope around. Marisol's legs trembled. Fire crawled low in her belly. Post-birth pain, raw and deep, made worse by the ride, the jeers, the cold. Blood stuck her thighs a tacky drag. She could taste iron. Every shout cracked across her like a whip. She gripped the baby to her chest, feeling the little ribs lift and fall. "Breathe, mi cielo," she whispered. "Breathe for me." The lantern's wick popped and spat, throwing jittering shadows up the plank wall. She was caught in them like a moth. Voss leaned on the top rail, knuckles white. 50? He said, voice low, mocking. "You got a mint in that pocket, friend? We run honest auction here." He laughed, and the men laughed with him, because cruelty is a language people learn quick when they're afraid to be the next sentence. The stranger set boots on the bottom rail and climbed into the pen like he was stepping into his own barn. Close up, he was taller than he'd seemed from the dust. Silver threaded his beard, deep lines fanned from his eyes. He had a broken nose that healed crooked, and a coat the color of the road. A Colt sat easy on his hip, not show, not threat, just truth. He bent without touching, gaze on the baby first. "Breathe. Little sprout," he said, and the way he said it made a few men glance away, uncomfortable at the sound of tenderness spoken in public. "Get out of my pen," Voss snapped, gavel raised. "This here property not yours yet." The man straightened, turned his eyes to Voss, and something in the way he looked made the night fold quiet. "Name's Eli Mercer," he said. "I run water and grass at the Mercy River. 50 buys the lot." "Take it." 50 and 5, someone countered, drunk enough to show off. Eli didn't move. 50, he repeated. The syllables fell like fence posts. Voss planted a hand on the rail and leaned close enough to smell the man's road dust. "How you ain't got the right to step in," he hissed. "Law says bids go where the bids go." "The law also says a man bleeding is owed a doctor," Eli said, eyes flicking to Marisol's legs, then back. "Suppose we start with Mercy and sort coins after." Voss smiled slow. "She ain't a man. Doesn't change the bleeding." The baby hiccuped, drew a jerking breath, then cried, a small desperate sound like a nail pulled from weathered wood. Marisol sagged with relief, tears lighting her lashes. She tried to say thank you, but the word broke apart in her throat. Voss thumped the rail with the gavel. 55 going once. Eli lifted a hand not to the gun but to the sky. "Friend," he said to the crowd, voice carrying clear, "ain't he man here still owned by his mother's memory? Keep your coins." The 50 stands for a doctor and a bed, not a brand. Lantern light flickered, counting faces. A ranch hand on the edge lowered his eyes and shifted his hat. A saloon girl near the back, face powdered, mouth tight, whispered please without sound. Voss saw the tilt of the crowd and felt his greed harden. He bared his teeth. "Going?" "Twice." "Sold," he spat, before another conscience could grow a spine. He tossed his palm out. "Pay first." Eli's boot scraped the dust. He didn't move toward the counting table. He moved toward the gate. "Careful," Voss said, gavel tapping the wood like a hungry clock. "This pen's mine till I see those dollars." Eli's eyes remained calm, dark as creek roots. "No," he said, "not anymore." And something in his tone told the wind to hold itself still. Lanterns flicker. A baby cries. The rope creaks overhead like a warning. What happens when Mercy challenges a man who only respects money? "Fastium ventumanti, bintiun demofreds." Eli Mercer had the look of a tired saint and the hands of a builder. Broad palms, knuckles scarred, a missing piece on the right index finger where some winter's wire had bitten deep. He shrugged the duster from his shoulders and laid it across a rail near Marisol as if it were a blanket from a clean room. He didn't touch her. He didn't ask permission from a crowd that thought it was theirs to give. He simply turned his body in front of hers, so she could breathe without 50 eyes climbing her. He glanced at the baby, old habits measuring temperature, color, the strength of a cry. "Name?" he asked softly. Marisol licked dry lips. "Marisol," she whispered. "And this is Alma." The syllable trembled out like a first step. Marisol, Alma. He nodded like he was fixing those names to posts in his head. "All right," Voss clucked his tongue. "Eli Mercer," he said, savoring it. "Thought you ran cows, not charity." Eli didn't turn. "Thought you ran cattle, not auctions where the lot bleeds." Murmurs pinned along the fence. Voss hated that sound. It meant his story was slipping. He slapped the gavel into his palm. "You'll pay 50 or I'll have you dragged," he said, loud enough for his men at the corners to hear. Two of them shifted their rifles and found courage in each other's glance. "Money's at the hotel," Eli replied. "We walk her there. You'll have your dollars in 10 minutes and a doctor in 15. His voice was patient the way a stone is patient, still but not moved by weather. Voss flashed a grin. "We? There is no we. There's property and buyers. She don't leave till I padlock my $80 eyes on coin." Eli finally turned. His face in lantern light looked carved from timber, deep grain, knots he didn't apologize for. He stepped to the gate. The hinges squealed, rope creaked, night leaned in. Across the way, a barmaid whispered, "Eli, don't," and somewhere a dog barked, sensing thunder. Voss gestured, and one of his men, a rangy boy with slick hair and a too-new hat, slid a rifle up from the crook of his elbow to his shoulder. Another took a step forward, knife flashing like a wink. The crowd's boots shifted, crunch, crunch, the circle tightening to watch a good hurt. "Friend," Eli said, and the word wasn't polite. It was a post hammered into earth. "We're cutting this rope." He spoke to the men, but he looked at Voss. The knife hand licked his lips. "Nobody cuts Voss's rope." "Nobody needs to," Eli said. His hand moved fast, not to the colt but to the rope above the gate, and he pulled, just enough to make it sing its groan into the dark. The sound made the hair prickle on necks. "It's rotten, like the knot that tied this whole thing together." Voss's smile thinned. "You think your name and that scar earn you the right to walk off with my goods?" Eli's eyes warmed, but not kindly. "I think being human does." For a heartbeat, the town of Abbott's Crossing remembered the mothers who had labored in its rooms, the wives who had stitched its shirts, the girls who had sold their evenings to buy bread. That memory passed like cloud across moon. Voss lifted the gavel. "Men," he said. 2 rifles angled down. Marisol whispered, "Please." Eli lifted his hands away from his sides, palms empty. "We walk," he said. Now, the rifles didn't drop. But something else did, courage slippery as lard. The knife hand glanced at the crowd and saw 5 faces he'd owed drinks to. If he cut a bleeding girl, he hesitated. "Friend, if you're gripped by this tale, hit that like button right now, because the fight is only just beginning." The in-world beat was a breath before storm. Voss's nostrils flared. He snapped the gavel down and pointed it like a wand. "Take him." A rifle cracked. Dust leaped. Eli moved. Boots hit boards. A baby cried. The first shot chose a side. Will the next shot save or shatter what Mercy is trying to build? The first bullet bit a splinter off the top rail near Eli's shoulder, showering his coat with sawdust. He pivoted, shoving the duster toward Marisol with a jerk of his chin, shield more than cloth, then stepped between her and the muzzle flashes. The pen surged, boots crunching, hands grabbing, that ugly ocean roar when men think they're anonymous. Lanterns swung wild, lighting faces in slices, fear, hunger, cowardice, shame, the whole West's gospel. Eli drew not with flourish, but with the mechanical sorrow of a man who has pulled iron too many times. His Colt cleared leather and coughed once. The slick-haired rifleman went down, hat flipping off into dust, rifle clanging. Eli's second shot clipped the knife hand's ear and sent the blade clattering away. He didn't shoot to kill unless killing insisted. He'd carried enough bodies to know the difference between bravado and burial. "Move!" He barked to Marisol. She staggered, baby pressed tight. Pain rolled through her knees like a flood through a canyon. Eli caught her by the elbow, warm, careful, then led, pulling her into the shadow of the gate where the lantern glare thinned. A bullet tore through the duster's bottom hem. She felt the wind of it skim her calf and bit down on a cry. Voss screamed, voice cracking, "Kill him! Kill the bastard!" Another shot spat. Eli flinched as a line of fire stitched across his upper arm. He didn't curse. He just looked down, saw blood darkening his sleeve, and filed the fact away like a fence break report. Problem noted. Fix later. He shoved the gate wide and used the swinging panel as cover, firing once more into the dirt at the boots of the men too eager to rush. A man fell backward, screaming at a hole in his foot that would teach him weather better than any almanac. "Alma," Marisol whispered, rocking the baby. "Hold on, mi vida, hold on." They burst from the pen into the street. Night air hit their faces. Cold, clean, the kind that tastes of sage and iron. The hotel lights glowed a block away. Between here and there, a scatter of crates, a line of hitching posts, and whatever men Voss hadn't yet paid to pretend they had spines. "Stay behind me," Eli said, voice even. He moved with economy, every step placed. He scanned windows, flicker, flicker, counted silhouettes, 1, 2, listened for the whine of a hammer pulled back. "When I stop, you drop. Keep the child's head covered." They reached the water trough. Eli paused, eyes on the black square of an alley to the left. A shadow detached, fast, low. Eli stepped into it, met it with the heel of his hand, and the man bent around the impact like a cut reed. A knife clanged off stone. Eli didn't even look where it landed. He kicked it under the trough and moved on. "Voss paid the whole town," Marisol panted, voice small, breath thin. "He will not stop." "He only pays men who've never met someone worth more than their fear," Eli said. "Keep going." A shot chiseled the hotel sign, puffing splinters. Eli spun, fired once. Window darkened, a silhouette dropped out of frame. He kept moving. Blood from his arm made his sleeve heavy. He flexed his fingers to make sure they listened. They reached the hotel steps. Eli shoved the door open with his hip and ushered Marisol inside. The lobby smelled of old wood and coffee. A desk clerk shot up from a ledger, mouth open to scold intrusion, and froze when he saw the baby, the blood, the gun. "Get Doc Havel," Eli said, breath steady. "No, He's upstairs, the clerk stammered. Room 3. Good. Eli waved Marisol up the staircase, then turned back to the street. Voss stood below, haloed by lanterns like a saint of bad deeds. 6 men fanned behind him, rifles lifted. This is theft, Mercer. Voss howled. If you steal from me, I take it in blood. Eli's face had the long sorrow of a church steeple. You never owned what you tried to sell, he said. Come collect your debt. He stepped back as a volley erupted. Wood screamed. Glass burst. Eli's shoulder kicked as another bullet found him, this time along the ribs. Hot, glancing, mean. He hit the stair rail with a grunt. Slid enough to know he'd be purple tomorrow if there was a tomorrow. He fired twice in reply, slow aimed. 2 rifles cracked and fell silent, 2 men cursing and clutching arms. Eli! Marisol called from above, voice too loud, too afraid. Please! He looked up and saw her on the landing, hair damp, eyes huge, the baby bundled in his dusty coat. Behind her, a door opened, and the round, sleepy face of Dr. Havel's spectacles crooked appeared. Havel blinked at the blood, then at the baby, and whatever fight he'd lost to whiskey these last years found its way back to his hands. Bring her in, Havel barked. You, rancher, hold them! Eli smiled, just a line quick as a match. He turned back to the street. Voss raised his pistol with 2 hands, teeth bared. Die for charity, then. Maybe, Eli said, and the word sounded like a prayer or a dare, but not tonight. He took the last 2 steps down and into the open, drew their fire like a lightning rod, and moved left then right, bullets gouging porch posts, sending lanterns rocking. He felt the tug of another graze along his hip. He planted his feet, let the night narrow until there was nothing but breathing and aim, and fired one last time. Voss's gun flew from his hand, spinning, clattering across the street. Voss stared at his empty fingers, like they had betrayed him. The crowd exhaled. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Voss screamed again, a sound thin with the note of a child who has lost a toy, and lunged. Eli dropped the spent Colt, grabbed the charging man by the vest, and they crashed against the trough. Water leaped! The knife Voss had tucked in his boot flashed and nicked Eli's ribs. Eli's forehead met Voss's nose with a sick, wet sound. Voss reeled, eyes watering. Eli twisted the knife hand, felt something give. The blade clatter to boards. But Voss had more men than Eli had blood to spare. A rifle butt rose behind Eli's head. Cut on impact. The lanterns swing. The baby cries from upstairs, Will mercy hold when the world swings a club at the back of its head? The rifle butt came down, but not where it aimed. The desk clerk, thin, terrified, heart suddenly bigger than his fear, had slipped from behind the counter with a poker. He swung wild and true. Wood met jaw. The rifleman screamed and fell, hands on teeth. The poker clanged to the street and skittered away. For his courage, the clerk looked astonished, as if someone else had borrowed his arms. Eli blinked sweat and blood out of his eyes, found Voss again, and finished what the night had insisted on. He drove the outlaw auctioneer backward over the trough's lip, held him by the vest and forced his face into the water. The splash swallowed Voss's curses, his flailing a desperate churn. Eli didn't keep him there long enough to drown. He kept him there just long enough to teach him something about breath, and who deserves it. When Voss sagged, coughing and cursing, Eli yanked him up and planted him against the trough. "Look," he said, voice a rasp. Up there. On the hotel landing, framed by a wavering lamp, stood Marisol with Alma in her arms. The baby's cry had lost its thinness. It had weight now, good and stubborn. Behind her, Dr. Havel held a rag spotted with blood and nodded once to the street like a verdict delivered. "She'll live," he called. "Both of them, if they can sleep." "Sleep," Eli repeated, taste of iron in his mouth. "That's all she came for." Voss coughed, spat, looked up, and what he saw broke through the cheap iron he'd clamped over his heart. For a moment he looked human, which is to say, ashamed. Then he looked at the crowd and remembered he owed them rage. "This ain't over, Mercer," he croaked. "I own this town's courage. Men here do what I pay them to." The crowd looked at their boots, then at Marisol and Alma, then at Eli, battered, breathing, unbowed. A ranch hand shoved his hands into his pockets, like he'd found them in a robbery and didn't know what to do. The barmaid stepped forward, chin up. "Not tonight, you don't," she said. "Not with a baby crying over your noise." Eli let go of Voss. The man slumped and found his feet wet, furious, smaller. "Run," Eli said, voice quiet. or stay and face a law older than your badge. Voss stared at the faces that refused to be his mirror and understood the math of the moment. He backed away, shoes squelching, then turned and vanished into the alley, darkness closing behind him like a door that never knew his name. Eli bent, picked up his Colt, holstered it with a wince, then steadied himself on the trough's rim as the world swayed and settled. The clerk approached with a trembling hand. "Sir," he said, voice thin, "you're bleeding." "I know." Eli touched his ribs and looked at the red on his fingers like he was checking the weather. "I'll bleed less when the doctors looked me over." Upstairs, Havel waved. "Bring him," he called to the clerk, "and tell the barkeep to send up broth and hot water." The old doctor's voice had command it hadn't worn in years. It fit him. Eli mounted the stairs slow, boots thudding, each step a small argument with pain. When he reached the landing, Marisol shifted Alma and looked at him. Up close, her eyes were not just dark. They carried flecks of gold, the way river water holds sun even when the banks are shadowed. "Why?" she asked, simple as a prayer. "Why would you buy me?" "For a bed?" Eli stood with his hand on the rail. He looked past her to the road beyond the window, the kind of road that steals men and gives them back narrower. He offered a slow, tired smile. "I didn't buy you," he said. "I bought time. For you to breathe without men measuring your breath." Her mouth trembled. She nodded. "Gracias." Inside the room, Havel fussed. He cleaned, he stitched, he swaddled. He ordered Eli to sit, then cursed him for bleeding on the chair. Marisol lay back on a thin mattress. The baby latched and swallowed, small jaw working, eyes squeezed shut against the world's light. The room's lantern flickered once and steadied, the flame a quiet flag. Below, the town rearranged its shame. Some men drifted home. Some stacked chairs to cover their part in the night. The barmaid took the clerk's hand and held it as if to anchor both of them to the better piece of themselves that had come forward. Eli dozed in a chair, chin on chest, fist still loosely around a gun he hoped not to use again. He woke once when Alma made a small hiccup and smiled without opening his eyes. Morning bled into the curtains. Dust glowed in that new light the way motes always do, like the past saying it would not be wiped away but could be lived alongside. Havel cleared his throat. "She'll be weak for a while," he said softly. "But she's strong." "Always was," Eli murmured. Marisol turned her face toward them. "What happens now?" Eli stood slow, the ache in his ribs a living thing that would need feeding with rest. He set his hat back on his head, pulled the brim down against the glow. "Now," he said, "you sleep. Then you decide. My ranch has space that isn't for sale, if you want chores and quiet. Or I can pay you to rest till your kin can be found. Or I can ride you as far from this town as you need a road to go." Her eyes filled and spilled. "Yours would do that," he nodded once. "I ain't a good man by storybook measure. My temper's mule stubborn. I've done things that wake me some nights. But I know the weight of a bed when it's offered, and how a bed can be a bridge." She laughed then, a wet, small sound. A laugh anyway. The baby sighed dramatically, as if to claim she'd done the hardest work of all. Eli touched the doorframe, then paused. He looked back. "One more thing," he said, and his voice shifted, outward to the folks beyond the wall, to the people gathering around a fire of words. "If you were in Marisol's place, what would you do? Would you wait for a hand? Or would you demand your breath back from men who priced it? Tell me?" He tipped his hat, then aimed that same voice, worn but sure, at the wide world. Like this story and subscribe for the next Wild West tale. And if you want to see how the next battle unfolds, don't miss the next story. Subscribe now. Downstairs, someone righted a chair. Outside, wind moved along the street and rattled a sign. Eli walked into morning, ribs bandaged, arm tight to his side. The duster cut and smoking with bullet kisses, proof that mercy is not the soft thing men mistake it for, but the stubborn one that throws its body into harm and says no until the rope stops creaking. Behind him, a young mother slept at last, her child breathing steady, lantern light flickering on a face that would remember both the cruelty and the bed, and choose one day which story to pass on.